Welcome everyone to our Amplify May seminar on the impact of technology and AI on music consumption and music streaming. I'm Xanthi Lowe-Brown and I'm an AMPS member helping to organise the 2025 Amplify series, which is really exciting. And today we're very lucky to be joined by Matt O'Leary. But before I introduce Matt, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands in which we're zooming in today. For me, that's the Turrbal and Yagara people in Brisbane, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to do a quick plug of our next Amplify session, which is on the 2nd of July. We'll be virtually travelling to Europe to hear from Associate Professor Laura Ferrari on the music science landscape in Europe. So make sure to get your tickets for that session. And just a reminder that the session today is being recorded and will be uploaded to our AMPS YouTube channel. So just let me know if you don't wish to be in the recording. Cool. So without further ado, we are really lucky today to be joined by Matt O'Leary for a fireside chat on his extensive experience working in the music industry and the technology industries. So Matt O'Leary is a global executive leader with over 25 years of experience in technology startups in New York, Los Angeles, Paris, London, Stockholm, and Melbourne. Matt has a deep personal passion for the intersection of music, technology, and entrepreneurship, and was an early employee at Spotify, playing a key role in building the company's first machine learning and data science division. His current focus is on designing the world's first purpose-built, high-resolution music listening center for health and well-being. So I'll now hand over to our AMPS president, Dr. Amanda Krause, to lead the fireside chat with Matt.
Thanks, Xanthi. I have the privilege of participating in this fireside chat. And so just for everybody who's here and involved, we thought we'd have a bit of a chat and then hold quite a bit of time for group discussion as well. So Matt, thank you. As Xanthi said, we're really lucky to have you join us and join our AMPS community. And I think to get started, what I'd love for you to do is just give us a little bit of context, give us a little bit of more of your background, just to set the scene, if you will.
Yeah, sure. Well, Xanthi and Amanda and everybody else, thank you for having me. It's an absolute privilege to be here. I've been kind of like loosely involved and or sort of connected to this community now for the past sort of 18 months or almost 2 years, and I'm very, very fond of a number of people that have been kind of very accepting and have given me a lot of their time over the last period to sort of think and kind of work through different ideas. So it's equally my pleasure to be here. So yeah, for sure, Amanda. Look, my background's a little bit varied and perhaps a little bit unconventional from a traditional point of view. But just to, I guess, go way back, I was kind of born and raised in a small kind of rural country town in New South Wales called Broken Hill. Lived there until I was kind of in my late teens. I was just actually recalling this sort of, I guess, intersection of my what could have been a quite fundamentally different career was where I grew up. It was very, very common for people like me who not particularly academically gifted and wasn't particularly good at school to go in and get an apprenticeship on the mine as a mechanic or something like that. And then a year before that was supposed to happen, the apprenticeship numbers sort of plummeted from, I think, something like 100 down to about 10. And so that kind of almost took that kind of path out of the equation for me. And I ended up sort of dropping out of school and opening a computer store with some family friends instead, which has taken me on quite a fundamentally different journey than what I thought I would end up on back when I was at school. But anyway, so yeah, very, very early was kind of fascinated in a now sort of quite I guess, embraced way from I guess, sort of a technology nerd, I guess is a good way of calling it. I kind of quite proudly kind of use that term. And was yeah, just really interested in kind of how computers worked from a very, very early age. So I felt kind of very fortunate that I was able to wrap my head around sort of technology of all sorts kind of quite quickly and started tinkering with different things. That then led me to getting several kind of early career jobs in internet, all sort of hardware, software, then eventually internet security. And back in sort of, I guess, the late 1990s, early 2000s. Um, where after doing that for a couple of years and spending some time in Brisbane, I moved to Europe and worked in Europe for about 5 years in London and Dublin. Still primarily in internet security, but sort of bit by bit moving away from kind of, I guess, the internet security side of things into a broader kind of like technical program management sort of role, and looking across kind of business more holistically from a technology sort of viewpoint. Um, that then kind of led to various other kind of tech and tech related roles. But eventually, over a period of time, I started moving away from being kind of, I guess, in the technical kind of program management side of things into HR and people leadership. Was fascinated by sort of culture, human behavior, behavioral science, organizational psychology, and how organizations could build better cultures, could build better products and services. And then that thankfully was kind of quite an interesting path for me, because I ended up then living in Toronto and Paris for a period of time before spending some more time back in Melbourne eventually. And then I moved to the US in 2010 and spent 10 years primarily in New York with a little bit of time in Paris, and then the remainder in Los Angeles, and then moved back to Australia about four or 5 years ago. But I guess what some of the common threads through there is, from a very, very early age, I had a very deep fascination with music and sound, and probably more sound than music initially. Was really into kind of hi-fi speakers and tinkering and breaking things and trying to fix things, and much to my probably parents' annoyment at the time. But yeah, so I've always had this sort of fascination with sound and music, and it's a very, very big part of my identity, a big part of kind of what I think about and exist within on a daily basis. And that has led me to kind of various ways of being involved in the music industry, both at Spotify, in the engineering team very early on in New York. I've managed bands for a period of time. I've hosted different kind of musical, social, kind of well-being sort of type events and experiences in different places. So yeah, it's a music and more recently, as I've understood more about the theory of music psychology and music neuroscience, it's a very big part of kind of, I think, why I exist, and my purpose in life is to pursue this area.
And I know most of the people here are probably really keen to know more about your time at Spotify. So I thought I'd start there,
Sure.
and get you to tell us maybe a little bit more of your role there and sort of what you saw in how that unfolded. We all know that Spotify now is a bit different to what it started out as, but just sort of to be able to tell us a little bit more about what you experienced and how you were involved and what your role was at that time.
Yeah, sure. Would love to. So, my time at Spotify. So I joined Spotify at the end of 2010, just after it had launched in North America, but had been live in several European countries, including its home country of Sweden, for several years at that point, and the UK. I was very, very lucky. I happened to be in New York when I was traveling with a band at one point, for what was comically a very disastrous and very expensive tour of playing a lot of shows to not many people. I was sort of like the band manager. But yeah, randomly kind of met one of the recruiters at Spotify at an event, started talking to them, and ended up sort of thankfully getting a job. And my first role there was I was the head of people operations for North America. So that was effectively like a HR role, focus on, I guess, people and culture, specifically within the engineering, product, and design practice. And so at that point in Spotify's kind of trajectory, there were two arms, or two kind of umbrella kind of organizations from a HR point of view. One that was focused on the technology, product, and design. One was focused on the business side of things. And my role was very much kind of working on the technology, product, and design side of things. Back then, I think Spotify I was sort of about employee 700-800 or something like that. and there were about 50 of us in New York or in the US at the time. But what was happening was Spotify had made quite a big splash, I think, in the European kind of tech scene, and was starting to make a bit of a splash in the US, not only as a favorable consumer product, but also as a engineering organization and a place to work. And so with some obviously very big established companies like Netflix, Google, Facebook, Instagram, all having very, very big a big presence in America and specifically in New York. We took one of the reasons my role existed was we took a very active stance on trying to build a great culture and a great organization that could build great products. And so a big part of my role was around recruitment strategy, and then building out, as Amanda noted before, the first of what is now a very, very, very large machine learning and data science organization. At the time, we started off with 2 people. There were, I think, Sweden, Stockholm is the head office of Spotify. It's a Swedish company, I think, as everybody might be aware. So we had a couple of people on loan from Stockholm to help us sort of start to recruit both graduates and also existing machine learning and data science engineers from other companies. And bit by bit, we sort of built that team. We went from 2 to 4 to 8 to, I think, to 50 people quite quickly over the course of about 18 months. Through that time, Spotify acquired a company called the Echo Nest that I was heavily involved in, which was at the time one of the world's leading kind of machine learning data science organizations, and had built some reasonably impressive, actually very, very impressive models around sort of acoustic properties and music analysis. And I think at the time they were in talks to be acquired by Netflix. I think Spotify, because of the founders had a musical background, they were kind of quite enamored by the idea of being sort of part of Spotify's future as opposed to Netflix's future, although their machine learning capabilities and the data science capabilities were quite universal from a media data point of view, not just music. So yeah, data analysis across the spectrum. But interestingly, and I've been reflecting upon this over the last little while, and I've spoken to Amanda and Xanthi about this before, is Spotify back then was fundamentally a different company than it is right now. It was a music-focused organization that really didn't have a roadmap or any particular vision or strategy around anything else other than music. And it wanted to be predominantly the world's best, biggest music streaming provider. Podcasts were a thing, but they weren't really a thing. They existed, but they didn't really have the presence that they have now in across our kind of societal kind of lens. And obviously Netflix at the time was very, very popular and had existed for some time, but Spotify's early vision did include I guess a component of a video service, but that got kind of canned quite quickly. But yeah, and I think what has happened is from that moment in time when we were sort of building out all these capabilities and sort of trying to scale the organization, and then to where it is now, which we can talk about in more detail in a moment. Yeah, it's quite a fundamentally different company and different organization, and so it almost feels a bit foreign to me kind of reading about Spotify now and it's where it sits as a technology provider relative to where I started.
I was just reflecting on, I think at that point though, you were mentioning Netflix, and I feel like at that point Netflix was still like a mail you a DVD and return it in the post, at least in the US, was like, it was fundamentally like Spotify was fundamentally different. Like it was quite a different offering. That's a different topic. So in thinking about your time at Spotify, and you've spent a lot of time talking about sort of like building the culture around that, and I'd love to hear more of sort of especially for my point of view of like coming from academia, sometimes the industry seems quite foreign, and just sort of how maybe you could speak a little bit more of like what the culture of working within the industry might be like, that sort of overlaps and interfaces with what we might see and want research to be. But like, how do you see the industry working with people like us who maybe are sitting within universities?
Yeah. I'll kind of break that into two sort of parts, Amanda. More broadly about the culture, I think the one of the I think the many positive things about Spotify back in the day, and I assume this to be true largely to an extent, is that the culture of the company was sort of built on kind of build quickly and break things, and so be very innovative, very I guess entrepreneurial in a micro kind of sense. But there's a lot of as a Swedish company, so there's a lot of I guess inherent kind of socialist kind of values and different things that kind of existed within the company about kind of how the culture evolved and how leadership was kind of developed. And so it made for a really great place to sort of to work and be as an employee. When it comes to kind of thinking about not only career development, but also a product development as well, like how there was a fairly kind of open-minded approach to we can build anything we want. Like we have the ability to hire the right people, we have the money, we have the expertise, we can build a product that kind of fits market, and the world is our oyster. What that meant, though, from an innovation point of view, there was a lot of different pockets of Spotify that existed that would test and trial things that would never make it to market. And often and sadly, I think in reflection, and especially now as I know a little bit more about academia than I did at the time, there were often like little micro partnerships between, I'd say, on the machine learning or well-being side of things that perhaps a couple of engineers might have spoken to a few people from university in Stockholm about being kind of data-driven or kind of theory-driven. And of course, we're hiring a lot of people that had come from academia, like PhD students, and so there's a lot of inherent academic knowledge and theoretical knowledge in the organization that was then sort of translated into practice and building and scaling architecture and different things. But there was never, at least in my view of the world at the time, there was never a big emphasis or a big push on how do we partner with academic institutions outside of the ability to hire talent. So there was never like a data-driven kind of thesis behind product development outside of what each individual might bring from their academic studies, which I think in hindsight, from my point of view, that may have been a slightly kind of short-sighted approach in terms of the ability and the value of maybe having those partnerships outside of a recruiting pipeline. Yeah.
I think though, in reflecting on what you were saying in terms of like build it, break it, innovate it, I think the timeline, sometimes in academia, we have quite a lengthy process, which would probably not always suit the sort of innovative timeline. But as an academic, I do wish that we had more scope to create these partnerships. So, and I know, so we have got people in the audience who are sort of coming from an academic background and probably interested in industry. Do you have any, I know it's a different landscape now, but do you have any tips for how somebody who has come from quite an academic research background might position themselves to wiggle their way into industry?
Yeah, a great question. Yeah, I do. I guess I think there's a number of different things. I think one, being kind of naturally innovative and kind of entrepreneurial, kind of from a mindset point of view, I think goes a long way. And I think the point you made about those different worlds and the timelines and the expectations of what can be done and needs to be done, often you obviously don't have the same level of kind of ethical kind of oversight or kind of administrative kind of needs as you would in academia for certain things. So and most tech companies I've worked throughout my career have had some level, and Spotify probably being the biggest by far, but some level of like a lab sort of type environment where even outside of the sort of the BAU operational building the organization, building product, there were like micro labs of innovation that were harnessing innovations from other parts of the company. And so you'd often have a team of like, say, 6 engineers go to Stockholm for a month, for example, and just work on a particular part of the product, test it, and it may get shelved straight away, or it may then eventually kind of make it into a public release, say 3 weeks later. Or that may even happen even quicker. I think there was a feature in Spotify early on, which was a beat tracking running feature where it would sort of, create a playlist based on your sort of your running beat. that got developed at a hackathon over the course of 1 week, was tested and released in beta as a public beta 2 weeks later. But went out to, I think, 5 million users at the time. So you can see how quickly that can move if they allow it. I think in terms of, to answer the second part of your question about advice, yeah, I think A, having an entrepreneurial spirit, B, being willing to, I guess, prototype and iterate quite quickly, having a very kind of clear idea about where you want to start, where you want to get to, but how to start. I think that's just good business advice anyhow. I think it's really important to have a strong vision about what you want to accomplish, but fundamentally you need to know the right place to start to do that and to test it. And then I think there's a lot of information available, more so than ever, around how especially technology companies work from an innovation and from an entrepreneurial point of view, and understanding some of the language that they use and how they talk about product development, especially on the product development side of things. And without sort of taking this conversation in a different direction entirely, I think if we think about what's been happening over the last couple of years with AI and how fundamentally quickly the whole landscape around software development is changing, and the access to tools that we never had before and what that might look like. And yeah, I think there's the ability to prototype and develop ideas has never been easier, which ironically is also true for music creation, which is a whole other sort of conversation around music licensing and royalties and creation and AI and generative kind of products. But yeah.
And I'm glad you raised AI, not because I necessarily want to go down an entire conversation about it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on, if we're thinking about a technology used to listen to music, let's sort of keep it to listening to recorded, as opposed to live concerts and festivals and things, but as technologies and, what you've seen grow. Do you have any thoughts on where we might be headed and sort of like what you think the future holds for how we engage with recorded music?
Yeah, I do a lot. I think I have a couple of predictions and a couple of kind of hopes, I guess. I guess we're about to reach a new plateau when it comes to accessibility around generative music, and the ability for anyone with basically no musical knowledge to create something based on some drag and drop or some sort of natural language sort of inputs, create a song that sounds like this or has that or merges these two things together, and then instantly build a song or an album, or once we have the computational power, an entire back catalog of music in minutes or seconds. Like it's crazy to think of where we might move or be in the not too distant future from computational kind of power, and what we can do with these large language models. I think what will happen, I think there'll be a natural sort of convergence of generative music that I guess has a place in society. That is, I think, often going to be low-hanging fruit, sort of not necessarily essential kind of active engagement sort of thing. It just kind of fills a bit of a void. There'll be a lot of people kind of playing around with creation tools and different things to create new music, but with the amount of new music that will be created on top of the ridiculous amounts of music and content that's created already, it'd just be impossible to keep up with it and impossible to sort of explore or learn or even be served up anywhere near the vast volumes of music that will exist. But I think and one of my hopes, but I also think this is a prediction, is one of the most compelling parts of our relationship to music as being humans is our ability to consciously understand that it was created and then performed by another human. And I think that will play a big part in both music creation and music consumption and music listening specifically in the future, that there will be a even bigger desire than there is right now for music generated by, like, verifiably generated by other humans. Because I think that human connection and the human touch is really profound. And once people start to grasp the how easy it is and how little friction exists for people to literally click a few buttons and create music. And it might sound as good, and I think from a sonic signature, it will probably be almost similar to within like AI images now to be almost indiscernible. But you will seek out, and people will build products, and organizations will innovate on the ability to create authenticity between artists and consumers. And I think that is already starting to happen. I think that's going to happen, quite a lot. Sadly, I think there's another domain or dimension to this where, and maybe longer term, the arc will correct itself. But I think we've already faced ourselves in a position where music is a commodity, and also like a increasingly less valued commodity, as a piece of content as opposed to a piece of art and the craft that goes into creating that art. And so I think that's going to take a little bit of time for us as a civilization, as a society, to sort of catch up to when it comes to just the ability to listen to music because it's accessible, versus our desire to seek and engage with and listen to things that are meaningful because it's a piece of art created by an artist who has a craft they've developed. So
thank you for sharing those predictions, and I like the prediction and the hope element to both. Before I open it to the group discussion, I do want to give you the chance to sort of share where you are now headed with your involvement in music and indeed within our community here in Australia.
yeah, sure. So, like I said before, I have been kind of on the fringes or in sort of various attachments to this wonderful community over the last period of time, and I've met several of you already in person in the past, and have been working closely with Amanda now for the good part of 18 months on some ideas that I've been working through. And as Xanthi said at the beginning, my dream and my vision is to create the world's first sort of sonically utopian listening space. And how that would exist, or how that would sort of materialize, is, I guess, the intersection of acoustic science and acoustic architecture and environmental psychology. So if we can think through some of the models around the theory and the academic kind of research that's gone into understanding how space design and then acoustic design can come together to create these really profound environments, I think there's a path for us in the future that allows music to have a much more meaningful impact on a lot more people than it currently does. If we can create spaces that people can come together as community centers, and have these incredibly sort of either one-on-one kind of like facilitated sort of sessions where there's maybe a psychological component or well-being or therapeutic component, and all the way across to just general kind of group and communal experiences that sort of, I guess, anchor to sociability and just having those kind of group common shared those moments. And I think there's something really and somewhat interesting on the back of our topic just a minute ago about AI, is that coming together to have these shared listening experiences, and I think done really well in a really beautiful space with beautiful sound and beautiful human care, can be really, I think, quite a compelling thing. So I've spent a lot of time recently kind of trying to draft in the process of drafting an academic overview of maybe what the intersection of these worlds would look like from a music psychology point of view and from an environmental psychology. And hopefully that'll see the light of day at some point in the not too distant future, and would love to share that with the broader community at some point.
Thanks, Matt. I know I have a million questions, but I also do not want to monopolize the entire conversation. So at this point, I think I will turn it back over to Xanthi so that she can sort of help us do some question and answer time, if that's all right.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And thanks, Matt. That was super interesting. I'm sure all of us really appreciated that insight into what the music industry is like, and also hearing your plans for the future. That's really exciting. Yeah, would anyone like to start us off with a question? I know I've got a few. Feel free to post them in the chat or just unmute. I might start with one. Um, so yeah, there's been a cool new book that's come out. I'm sure you've seen it, Liz Pelly's book called Mood Machine. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and it's all about the rise of this perfect fit content, PFC, and yeah, music that's designed for the background really and designed to fit a certain mood. What's your take on that book?
I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, unfortunately. I've been a bit preoccupied, but I'm aware of the book. Look, um, I think there's two parts to this. I think there is again, there's maybe the hopeful kind of side of things where I think with the technology we have, and even kind of leaning into some of the ideas I've been kind of thinking through myself just recently, is the ability to kind of curate uh, experiences and moments in time for people with music, and specifically music listening, but I think it extends well beyond that as well. Where it can be very tailored, specifically tailored from an evidence point of view or from a cultural kind of lens, um, to sort of help or to be targeted at or kind of help with different experiences and different sort of conditions and things like that. And I think there is a, a an awful lot of really great potential for us to use that for good. I think also too it plays into a little bit to what I was talking about before about the commodity of music and um, how that can be used to sort of influence behaviors, maybe not always in the best intended ways. I know there's a very big company or growing company here in Melbourne called QSIC, which does music programming for supermarkets and other retail. And they have a team of data scientists and behavioral kind of people focused on different types of music and different acoustic and sonic settings that help people buy more in retail environments. And so subtle manipulation of kind of behavioral sort of traits in a retail environment, and how music can sort of be shifted and changed and different things. And so look, I think I think there's a lot to explore there. And happy to talk more about the detail of that when I've actually had a chance to read the book.
Yeah, sounds good. Oh, I think Anna has a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Matt. That was really interesting. As someone who doesn't really know much about this industry part at all, like I'm really curious about this timeline idea that kind of Amanda brought up, and you were saying everything's so quick, right? So I'm wondering how we can be a value add in academia because, obviously these big companies have so much money, they have so access to so many people, they don't have to do ethics, like what's to stop them, right? So how do you have an idea of how academia can integrate or can be a value add, or do you think we kind of just give up and it's just too hard? Or I'm just wondering your take on that.
Yeah, no, well, I certainly don't think we should give up, and it's all too hard. I don't think it's too hard at all. Look, I think I think there are two worlds that I'm going to use like a programming reference, but like we basically need an API to connect the industry to academia, and map out some endpoints of kind of how the two worlds can communicate more effectively. I think that, and if we look at it from both sides, I think from a industry point of view, I think one of the things that might make some organizations reluctant is just perhaps the administrative kind of overheads that come with it, and all the timelines of getting things done and approval. And they often don't necessarily align with for-profit organizations who have deadlines and sort of shareholder kind of uh, based kind of goals for the business. But at the same time, I think there's a really great opportunity for academia at a micro and macro level to kind of think about the ways it could interface with industry, that made some of the information more accessible, that made, I think, engaging with academia a lot easier. And perhaps there's like a level or like a layered kind of approach where maybe there isn't the same level of kind of ethical kind of overlay at the beginning to sort of maybe test and innovate. Maybe there is a way to sort of set up these labs, like I think, and maybe Melbourne Uni might be doing some of this already, where they have these sort of different labs set up where they can kind of collaborate with the industry, and or incubators where people within academia can sort of act like a bit of a startup and test ideas and build product and kind of see if they can get some sort of market traction. But I think the more institutions can do to make the information, their people and their systems and their knowledge accessible, and I think the better that could be for industry. At the same time, I think industry needs to obviously understand and respect that a lot of time, effort, love, and care and money goes into creating these academic institutions, and that needs to be respected as well. So, and I know there are a number of great people in a lot of organizations doing as much as they possibly can to interface with industry better. And I think if there's if we can get a little bit more kind of advocacy on the industry side to sort of generate more interest in partnerships with academia, I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah, just to add on to Anna's question, yeah, as academics, we don't really, well, I don't understand how the research works in industry and what user testing looks like. And I was wondering if you could give us maybe an insight into, yeah, what a researcher does in these companies.
It can really vary quite a lot, Xanthi, depending on I've seen it where there have been I guess from a user research point of view, where maybe some of the people in the user research kind of teams have come from specific academic institutions, they're kind of leveraging their knowledge and relationship and networks to sort of to anchor to I guess, for want of a better way of putting it, like a feed or a sort of a data point of sort of ongoing research. But often it's, I think, and at Spotify back in the early days, and I hope this has changed over time. So this is probably just one very small, thin example. Is that I think there was an element of frustration again around the access to data and the speed at which that could be accessed, that would constrain that. So then they would go off and kind of just basically build their own research and kind of publish their own papers, which weren't obviously academic papers, but they would be end up sort of being industry kind of papers, or publications that would kind of talk about different things. But user research is such a fundamental part of building product and product development, both in terms of initial kind of, I guess, product market fit and validation, as well as kind of A/B testing products and services. And at one point, while I was at Spotify, I think there was the user research group was about 150 people. And at any one point in time, there was something like 80 or to 100 versions of Spotify across different countries, all testing different features, and different features would work differently in different locations and whatnot. And so there could be anywhere up to 1 million people using a particular feature for a very small period of time. And they built some pretty robust infrastructure about how to assess and monitor the utilization of a particular feature relative to what may have existed before and or after. And so there was, what we'd end up doing is building a consumer facing kind of research team, but then there was a data engineers that would build the infrastructure to manage the vast amount of data that they would gather from the research, their own research. But that was largely sort of internal developed research and not necessarily always a partnership with sort of academia.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Does anyone have a burning question?
I want to ask something not along those lines. But just listening to your career and like the different avenues you went down, I was just so curious as to like kind of how you see yourself today. Do you kind of shift who you are depending on who you talk to about your expertise, or do you speak as one person that encompasses all these experiences? I just kind of was interested in your approach to like networking from your position.
Great question. Oh, I should have brought my therapist along. Maybe she could give you a better insight. Yeah, look, it's interesting because one of the things that I did a couple of years back was when I first moved back to Australia, I got a job as an executive in a startup as a fintech company based up in Byron Bay. And it was the hardest, most stressful job I've ever had in my entire life. I do not recommend going into that world with incompetent early stage, well-funded startups, incompetent founders. It is, especially in a HR people and culture role, it was relentless for 2.5 years. But and I have tried very hard to kind of let go of that world and kind of, I guess, interesting kind of redefine my professional identity around something new as opposed to what I have done in the past. But I'm still very much, if I'm being really honest, and I'm in a bit of a transitional period where I'm trying for the first time my own independent, I guess, entrepreneurial lens on innovation, especially around the things I spoke about before, and moving away from that kind of like, I guess, corporate or kind of tech career. But yeah, it can be really hard. Like I guess I've struggled with depression and different kind of mental health kind of challenges in the past, and that sort of I think that has played a bit of a role in kind of now moving towards something that feels more purpose driven. And I feel very fortunate that I can, when I need to be, I guess, a little bit extroverted and very comfortable reaching out to people, as I did with several people on this call in the past, and just sort of trying to express some ideas that I had and sort of trying to get some help along the way on how to bring those things to life. But I think fundamentally, though, as a piece of career advice, is doing work that you love. I know there's a lot of cliches around this, but kind of finding the work that you love doing and letting that be a part of your identity, I think is really important, but it should never be your whole identity. And I was on the wrong side of that equation for a long time, where I let my professional work identity kind of consume who I was. And bit by bit, through various things, including some great therapy, have let go of that a little bit and be a little bit more comfortable with just sort of accepting the things that I can do and want to do, and the passions and skills that I have, but also being a bit more comfortable with perhaps some of the things that I'm not great at, and not letting those things limit what's possible. Because I think using the example of kind of what I'm trying to build and develop at the moment is I've got this great idea, but it's going to take a lot of people to bring this to reality. And if part of my role, or a big part of my role, is just to develop the idea and then find the right people to execute, then I think that's a life worth lived.
Thank you. I will take that to my therapist. That's great advice. Thanks so much.
But if like any topic we've spoken about today, if anybody wants to reach out, I'm more than happy to share more about that topic. It's something that's kind of very close to my heart, something I've been thinking a lot about the last 12 months. So if at any point Anna, I can be of any help, or you want to know more or just chat further about it, yeah, please reach out.
Yeah, no, we'd love to have you back if you ever want to come back.
Thank you. I'll accept your offer.
Yeah, would anyone else like to ask a question?
I have a question to throw back at the group.
Sure.
So a lot of questions, there's some momentum around kind of how industry and academia can work together or closer, and what that could look like. And for someone who's come from industry, and I guess probably still identifies loosely compared to you amazing people as industry, and someone who dropped out of high school and has never been to university, had learning difficulties when I was younger. So I don't have a credential kind of academic background, but I'd love to hear from you all, what would you like to see from industry, and what do you think academia could do differently or better, both in the macro sense, or even if in the context of kind of what I'm trying to work towards with a number of wonderful people, like how people like me could think about relationships and partnerships and with people like yourselves.
Yeah, that's a great question. Would anyone like to start us off?
I'm happy to. The answer. I had to say, hearing you answer questions saying that there's this partnership required, that this communication like makes me hopeful. In the sense that, yes, so much of what I see in academia is so, I mean, fruitful in its own kind, but it's so caged in its context and it's feeding it into itself that it then doesn't serve the purpose into the reality, such as the industry. And so I think having the conversation is such a great starter, and just to kind of like instill those values and then action them. But I think there, time and time again, we have those conversations of we need to cater to reality, we need to contribute to that. But then unfortunately, because of time and money and everything, it becomes kind of it doesn't action quite often in itself. Yeah, and I guess I'd like to see the action part. I mean, that's asking something really big, of course, from my little position here, but it's something that I think if it's what we believe in and if it's what we want, I feel we should, yeah, invest towards that. And I something like AMPS does so great is that we love community and we love to engage with community, and that's something that I'm so proud of what we do here. And yeah, I wish that institutions and likewise industry and I've met some industries that do vice versa as well. That yeah, if more people could do it, I think that would be really good for our society in general. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, I think there's so much potential and opportunity. And I think there is, looking at this, I guess, from an outsider's point of view, I think there's so much potential for a lot of academic institutions to embrace, I guess, being a bit more proactive and pragmatic when it comes to sort of being accessible, but at the same time, then like advertising what's available and being more more intentional about, well, here's what we can do. Like we're building these systems, we're building these programs, we're building this new curriculum to help future workforces and contributions into society. I think the more both individually and collectively as a part of our kind of societal fabric, if more and more organizations can come together and kind of share back with what's accessible and what's available, I think that then perhaps becomes a little bit of a menu that industry can then choose from.
Yeah, I think at the moment it feels a little bit separate. There's industry and then there's academia. And it'd be awesome, I think, even just to do research collaborations with industry professionals and, even working on a paper together, and running an experiment together. That would be awesome.
Yeah. And like I know that happens a lot, like, but I think it doesn't happen anywhere near as much as it could or should. And it my assumption, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm very happy to be to shift my perspective on this in real time. But it seems to me that as a general rule, and I'm kind of generalizing quite broadly here, that perhaps one of the things that may be less incentivizing for a lot of industry people, it's just the timelines of how long things can take and the amount of administration involved in doing relatively what I guess in the industry world or in business world would be seen as relatively simple things seem to take a lot of time with a lot of paperwork, which I think just isn't often a good use of people's time. We've got all these incredible minds, and the 9 of you on this call included, who probably spend a large majority of their time doing paperwork and admin, and less time actually doing research, and less time thinking about innovation and thinking about how to put some of these ideas in practice, or validating the data and things like that. So if there are ways that the industry or government or anybody could help either minimize or automate, and I think with AI is probably going to help a lot. Like I wrote a draft academic overview paper the other day in about half an hour after learning how to prompt engineer my way through it. That would have taken me a month in the past. And so I think there already are like a almost overwhelming amount of kind of academic oriented tooling out there now and platforms that can do various parts of that. But if there are ways we can simplify some of that process to free people up to do the actual more interesting creative work, I think that would be a massive, massive improvement in terms of industry's appetite and interest and ability to partner with academia, because you would remove 50, 75%, 90% of the overhead, the administrative overhead that often may be a constraint.
Yeah, and even maybe evolving internship opportunities. Because I've seen a lot of great internships at Spotify, for example, but it just doesn't kind of fit into the timeline of doing a PhD because you have these expectations to meet of 3 publications and Yeah, it'd be cool if you could do one of your research projects at a company like Spotify, which would form one of the papers or something like that.
Yeah, and there was a whole graduate recruitment and internship program at Spotify, and still exists, and it's quite large. It's where they do, especially in Europe. Less I don't think there's a presence for that in Australia because no engineering or product development here done in Australia. But yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of other organizations out there that either already are doing it or could do it with the right structure and the right focus. That actually could be, I think, quite beneficial for a lot of PhD students.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, before we wrap up, does anyone have a last question for Matt?
I just have a comment, really, rather than a question. But I just listened to your talking. I think I'm thinking about all these organizations and institutions, and I think maybe part of this challenge is that it's there's like in different generations of thinking, and like there's forward thinkers, not necessarily by age, I'm saying, but by just their mentality of like those who want to make change and those who are kind of complacent, and maybe it's trying to get those people who want that change to start relationships across and kind of push their organizations forward and not to make sudden changes or anything, but to kind of get the right minds in the right place, like you were saying.
Yeah, and I think again, probably a little bit of a broad assumption or kind of generalization, but I think there is, like any societal kind of change and evolution or revolution even, is you need the right mix of the right people at the right time. And I think, especially with academia, I think there's probably a lot of people in academia that have been in academia for a long time and probably holding on to ways of working that maybe aren't necessarily as adapt to sort of like modern ways of working or kind of technology or attitudes. And I think there's opportunities for, I guess, maybe more embracing kind of innovative ways of working and kind of a more I was going to use the term progressive, but I don't mean that in a political sense, but I meant in terms of like just embracing different perspectives from different people of better ways of working, more efficient ways of working that try and create a better connection with kind of the outside world, with industry.
Yeah, well, I think I might end the session there. Matt, thank you. Interesting discussion. Yeah, if everyone could please join me in a virtual round of applause for Matt. We really appreciate you taking your time out of your day to join us today. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
My pleasure, Xanthi. Thank you for having me and hosting me, and Amanda for all your wonderful questions, and Anna and everyone else's both Anna's your questions. Yeah, a pleasure to be here, and like I said, happily engage further on any of these topics or anything else, either formally or informally. So please reach out to Xanthi, and she can happily pass on my contact details if you don't already have them. And yeah, very happy to help and support in any way I possibly can. And if anybody identifies any ways I can do anything to actively help on some of the things we've spoken about today, please let me know, and I'll do my best to help in as many practical ways as I can.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks. Have a lovely day. I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.